Hello, and welcome to our video looking at the Paris Peace Conference and the Treaty of Versailles right here after World War One. So, to break all of this down, we'll look at four main themes. We'll look at Wilson's 14 points and kind of what he suggests for the new balance of power in Europe, repercussions for Germany, the Treaty of Versailles itself, and then the actual results from the Treaty of Versailles, like what happens next. First, let's set up, what did this conference look like? Well, first, they're going to meet at the Palace of Versailles in France, and that's where they're going to do some of this negotiating. Now, there's 27 different victorious countries that will meet in January of 1919 to sort out this peace agreement, and the main people leading this are going to be the United States, Great Britain, and France. Russia is notably left out of this Paris Peace Conference because they're dealing with their own revolution, and they'd also signed the um, Treaty of Brest-Litovsk earlier, and it took them out of the war. Now, most people are going to enter with optimism and like, this is going to be this new era. We're going to reshape the future. This is going to be great. Let's go ahead and look at what are the main things President Woodrow Wilson kind of outlined as being a necessity for Europe and the world kind of moving forward. We can break President Wilson's themes down to two or three different things. They're either going to center around liberal or democratic ideas, so things about like freedom of something, the right to vote, that kind of thing. They'll see that he wants an association of nations. That's one of the most important points. He wants this group to get together to kind of help prevent another big war like this happening. A lot of them have to do with trading policies, just making them open so that, anybody can come in and perceivably trade in these places. And then also self-determination. So this means that those nationalist movements in places like Turkey, Poland, Eastern Europe, he wants them to be able to kind of create countries based on their own nationalities and ethnicities. But he also wants them to be able to decide what type of government system they want to do that with. All right, next, let's look at what the plans were for Germany, the main loser of this war. The two people that kind of have the most influence in, this tide against Germany are going to be France and Britain, the people who spent the most time trying to fight them off. So, in particular, George is the Great Britain prime minister at this time, and then Clemenceau of France, he's the prime minister of France. They're really concerned with punishing Germany specifically, and especially France. France has been, battered for the last, 6 years. They are, in a lot of debt. They have a lot of ill will towards Germany, the state that literally just invaded them and then caused all of this mass destruction. So they kind of had the camp of this peace conference split into two. It's the group of people that are like, well, yeah, we need to like punish Germany, but we can't make it too harsh. And then the people who want Germans to really suffer, to pay a lot of reparations, to um, kind of really be handicapped from the actions that they chose during the war. Here are some of the things that Clemenceau wants in this peace treaty. He wants a buffer state between him and France. So specifically like the Rhineland, Alsace-Lorraine, like they want all of that kind of as its own state so that there's somebody between the two of them. He wants the permanent demilitarization of Germany. He wants them to not be able to kind of produce new weapons, to have an army above a certain size. He doesn't want them to have any kind of power at all. And he wants these huge sums for German reparations. He wants to be paid back for all of the destruction that happens in France. And this really frustrates Wilson because he's kind of thinking to himself, we can't move forward like this. You're going to leave Germany handicapped in a way that they can't come back from. And it leads to him leaving these peace talks in April. Remember, they started in January and we're already in April and they haven't come to a total decision yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at what do they officially decide on at the end of this peace conference. So first, before we do this, I just want to reiterate, let's think back to like 30 years ago when Germany is a new country. They used to be the Prussian Empire. They were a force to be reckoned with. Like this is a historically very strong state that now this treaty is attempting to just kind of completely dismantle. So when you look at this in historical context later on, thinking about how, the balance of power in Europe, they've been one of those major players. And now two of the other big powers, Britain and France, are basically kind of dismantling Germany as they know it. So just to think about why do Germans get so upset about this, that's part of the reason. But here's what the Treaty of Versailles says. It says that Germany's colonies in like Africa and Asia, they're all going to be given to France, Britain, and Japan as League of Nation mandates. It says that parts of Germany are going to be ceded to a new Polish state, that Germany has to limit its army to about 100,000 men, and they have to agree to build no forts in that buffer land, the Rhineland between Germany and France. Not that they can't have people there, but that they can't build any forts there. And the Allies declared that Germany, with Austria, is responsible for the war and therefore had to pay reparations equal to all civilian damages caused by the war. Another big piece of this is self determination. So, just included in there that all these new nations, like Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Yugoslavia, they all get to kind of be a part of that decision to make their own boundaries, but then also they get to decide what type of government they want, who's going to be in power, all of those types of things. We see the dismantling of the German Empire basically right here before us. And everything gets kind of, shifted off to different people, different victors that won. And one of the big repercussions of this is that the United States does not sign this treaty. So Wilson cannot drum up the support at home to uh, get the United States to back the terms of this treaty, especially the parts about the League of Nations, saying that, if Germany or one of these other states starts to be more aggressive again, if they start to break the terms of this treaty, that the United States would go in and actually like forcibly help them. And the United States is kind of done with this. They're like, we didn't want to be involved in this foreign war anyways. You guys brought us in, and now we're officially done. Like, we don't want to be involved. We are not interested in European problems. So this takes us to the results. Where are we leaving things at the end of this peace conference? Now, in a sense, if you think about it, the League of Nations, which is kind of one of the biggest things to come out of this treaty, I think what they're really trying to do is kind of replicate the Congress of Vienna, where everybody just agreed to maintain the balance of power. I think that's really what the League of Nations is meant to do. But part of it is that they don't include Germany and the Soviet Union. They are not part of this new League of Nations. And when you take out two of the major powers in Europe, especially the two that, I mean, maybe they don't know that the Soviet Union is going to be so what aggressive, I guess, here in the future. It really stifles the impact of like what a treaty like that can do. So the League of Nations basically ends up being pretty weak and ineffective. One of the good things is, though, it does like the groundwork for eventually the United Nations after the after World War II, which will be quite a bit more effective than the League of Nations ever was. Another impact is successor states. So those new states that are created, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, um, they are part of what was Germany and Austria-Hungary. And these states had democratically elected governments, which are going to be a big deal. We're kind of done with monarchies at this point in time. They're all pretty much over. And if they do exist, they're much more figureheads than anything else. The next result is this thing called the mandate system. So this particularly applies to the Middle East. Now, the Middle East, you remember, a lot of the Ottoman Empire gets broken up after World War One. And those regions get divided up amongst different European powers. So Europe is in control of large parts of the Middle East, and Middle East feels very disrespected about this. They do not like these foreign people telling them what to do. They historically have not had that. They've been ruled by Islamic empires, that culturally and ethnically make up people like them for most of, like, pretty much their entire history. So now we've got a new state that develops. The Ottoman Empire becomes the Republic of Turkey. And we'll be talking more about that as we enter the interwar period. And then finally, the results for Germany. I mean, anybody that studied history knows that the Treaty of Versailles really brings a lot of economic problems for this new government in Germany. They're called the Weimar Republic. They have a huge debt to pay off. There's massive inflation that occurs as a result of that. And we'll talk a lot more about this in another video about the interwar period. But it leads to bad things for them. The mandate countries and colonial countries, they do not receive independence. A lot of countries were promised different types of independence or just like more freedoms, as if they fought with the European colonial powers, like India, for example. But they don't get that after the war. They kind of rescind those offers. And then, of course, the League of Nations ultimately fails to resolve the problem that alliances created in the first place. Part of the reason they're in this mess is because the alliance system, and the League of Nations just creates an all new alliance system. So it doesn't really fix any of those problems. Okay, and that brings us to the end of our time today. Thank you for watching about the Paris Peace Conference and the Treaty of Versailles.